There's 4 primary reasons that I personally don't want to buy the Poco X3 Pro. The Poco X3 Pro makes a ton of compromises for gamers, and I'm not a mobile gamer, okay? And all of these compromises stack up to a device that's going to perform pretty well in regards to smoothness, responsiveness, and usage, but in kind of the real world, in the things that to me make a good phone, it is just average, okay? The first one is the screen. It's the 120 Hertz LCD display that we have on the regular Poco X3. And on paper, 120 Hertz AMOLED display, 120 Hertz LCD display, sorry, is totally adequate, and it's not a bad display. But for me personally, I would rather have a display that's 60 Hertz or 90 Hertz, but that is more than 450 nits of peak brightness. When I had my Redmi K20 Pro, I did encounter issues using it outdoors in direct sunlight, and that was a 450 nit AMOLED display, so the same peak max brightness that we have from this LCD display. I don't particularly care about the fast screen refresh rate, but I think that for the average consumer, it's more important for them to be able to see their device easily outside than it is for it to have 120 Hertz. That's just me. The second reason that I don't really want to buy, and in my opinion, I wouldn't buy the Poco X3 Pro, is the cameras. Now, if I am someone in the mid-range smartphone market with anywhere between $300 to $400 to spend, let's say, and I'm upgrading from a prior device that was $300 to $400, let's say, from a year or two ago, I don't see the IMX 582 that is coming on the Poco X3 Pro as that big of an upgrade. In fact, when I compared the Redmi K20 Pro, which has the IMX 586, which is the identical sensor just with 4K 60 in regards to like noise performance and stuff, and I compared it to my Poco F1 Pro, and I'll have a video about that somewhere up here, I didn't see that big of a jump in performance between the IMX 366, IMX 363, and IMX 586. That said, if you're coming from a device with a potato camera, then maybe this would be good. But for my money, camera is more important to me. Also, the ultra-wide of the Poco X3 Pro is a worse ultra-wide than the Poco X3. The Poco X3 has the 13 megapixel ultra-wide. The ultra-wide of the X3 Pro is the 8 megapixel that comes on the Redmi Note 10, which is just like a very average ultra-wide camera. So it's not that compelling of a camera package, unfortunately. Although the 5 megapixel, oh no, it's the 2 megapixel macro camera on the Poco X3 Pro. That 2 megapixel macro camera is the same macro camera I have on my Mi 10, and that's a potato. The third reason that the Poco X3 Pro is just not a device for me is that it uses glass on the front and glass on the back, and there is a metal ring that goes around it, but the overall chassis of the device is plastic. And plastic can bend, and plastic can deform a little bit. And Gorilla Glass Victus can bend and deform a little bit, as we've seen in Jerry Rig Everything tests. But Gorilla Glass 6 and whatever glass they're using on the back of it is probably going to be less shatter resistant. I mean, the idea of having glass on the front, glass on the back, and then have that reinforced with plastic, to me seems like a recipe for disaster when they could have just gone with the whole plastic fantastic Poco F1 style, which would have been more durable, and people with Poco F1s know exactly what I'm talking about. That device is a tank. Now, the fourth and final reason that the Poco X3 Pro is just not a device for me is the chipset. And the chipset is the Snapdragon It's actually the Snapdragon 860, which is just a rebadged Snapdragon 855. There's really no difference between the two of these. And on top of that, they are obviously placing a big emphasis on Antutu benchmarks, on synthetic benchmarks for mobile gamers. And the Snapdragon 855 was a great chip in its time. It did a lot of stuff great. I enjoyed using it, and it's not a bad chipset at all. But they are obviously cutting a lot of corners, and this is not even talking about the speakers or the microphones. The microphones of the Poco X3 Pro are 96 kilobit per second, which is pretty bad, recording for audio quality. The speakers of the device, they might be dual speakers, but they are not even close to the best speakers that we can get, right? There's just too many compromises, in my opinion, for the performance. And so there's a ton of other devices on the market that are more geared towards me. And I think that for the average consumer that doesn't necessarily care about the overall device performance and cares more about how they use the device, being outdoors to take pictures and stuff like that, I think that there's better phones on the market. That's not to say that this device wouldn't perform well for gamers. It's got a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and it's got Xiaomi's 2-year-old 33-watt charging tech. But overall, it's just not a device for me. I think it's a good value for the mobile gamers, but I think that we need to identify the Poco X3 Pro for what it really is, which is a budget Black Shark device for people that want to play mobile games. Peace.